Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus now, the former spokesman of the Israeli Defense Forces. Colonel, what do you make and what are you hearing about the response from Iran's military?
Yeah, good evening from Israel. Just came out of the bomb shelter myself. Luckily, nobody was hit in my vicinity, but definitely, as we know, impacts in Tel Aviv. So far, I do not know of dead Israelis, only wounded. And I think this is more or less advancing according to plan or assessments. I think it was anticipated from yesterday that the Iranians would do what they are doing now, to fire massive amounts of ballistic missiles towards what they claim is military targets, and that may be the case, but effectively hitting civilians. And where this leaves us, I think, is with now perhaps the ball coming back into the Israeli court and Israel having the option to decide whether to expand the target bank that Israel has been attacking so far, which so far has been limited to military personnel, and people related to the nuclear weapons program and nuclear facilities. Israel, of course, can expand that to national infrastructure and to other things. And I think that what Minister Katz is insinuating here is in that direction. I'm not sure that decision has yet been made by Israel. It's still early minutes. And it depends on how many casualties and what kind of damage we'll see in Israel and how many more missiles the Iranians will fire. But I think before this Iranian attack against Israel, I think the question was, what are the Iranians going to do? Are they going to de-escalate, or are they going to try to get even with Israel? It looks as if they're aspiring to escalate, and I think Israel will see that hand and raise by the capabilities that Israel has.
Well, let's talk about that, because if the defense minister of Israel is saying that Iran crossed red lines when it, quote, dared to fire missiles at civilian population centers in Israel, and indeed we're looking at scenes of what look like apartment buildings in Tel Aviv, if Minister Katz also says that the Ayatollah regime, the Iranian regime, is going to pay a very heavy price for its criminal actions, they're saying, does that mean that the Israeli defense forces feel as though it would be appropriate to now respond with an attack on civilian centers, population centers in Tehran? Is that what that means?
No, I mean, Jake, as you've seen in the early Israeli strikes were as surgical as a military strike can be, and they were focused on military targets and people that were related to the nuclear program, and with extremely little collateral damage, if any. Of course, the IDF won't be, wasting ammunition on causing wanton destruction in Iran. Israel will be focusing its capabilities on specific military objectives of military importance. But what I think here is that where it's leaning is that this could lead us into Israel now starting to attack infrastructure that is of national importance and perhaps related to the economic capabilities of the Islamic regime. And perhaps that is what Minister Katz is kind of paving the way for. Now, let's be honest here. If we look at the balance of capabilities as they have been displayed so far in this encounter, as Colonel Layton also spoke about, there isn't parity. Israel has air defenses, and Israel has been proven its capacity to peel away Iranian air defenses and is operating in Iranian airspace now with extremely limited restrictions. And that is no small thing, and I think the Iranians are aware of it. It's a dangerous gamble that the Iranians are doing, because they are gambling without really having solid defenses left, and it could open this up to a much broader conflict where everything in Iran, infrastructure and facilities that are not only related to the nuclear program or the Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, could become targets, and that has not been the case so far. So we might be witnessing an escalation and a transition here from one group of targets to another.
So Barak Ravid, who's a CNN commentator and also a journalist with Axios, one of the best sourced reporters on the Middle East that exists, he and a colleague reported earlier today that two Israeli officials told them that Trump and his aides were only pretending to oppose an Israeli attack in public and didn't express opposition in private. We had a clear U.S. green light, one of them claimed. The goal, they say, was to convince Iran that no attack was imminent and make sure Iranians on Israel's target list wouldn't move to new locations. Netanyahu's aides even briefed Israeli reporters that Trump had tried to put the brakes on an Israeli strike in a call on Monday, when in reality the call dealt with coordination ahead of the attack, Israeli officials now say. I don't know if you know anything about that, but what is your response to that reporting?
I usually treat every report that I hear that doesn't name a source, but sources, anonymous sources, with a lot of skepticism. Having said that, judging by the results of the amount of senior Iranian military and nuclear officials that were obviously unaware of the threat that they were under and were eliminated by Israel, it would indicate that there has indeed been a very successful deception of the Iranians, and that the Iranians were led to believe that they are safe and that they can continue to develop nuclear weapons, that they can continue to fund terror organizations and continue to aspire for the destruction of the state of Israel, when in fact Israel was preparing and eventually executed quite a successful military strike on them.
So whether or not President Trump was part of the deception, there was a deception that was successful. Jonathan, Israelis, I believe, are being told that they can leave the bomb shelters. Is that correct? And does that mean that the wave of this Iranian retaliation is over? And how much more do you expect in terms of counterstrike, counterstrike, counterstrike?
I think we're in for a long night and in for a few very challenging days, the way that it's looking. And I think that the Iranians have still enough missiles and capabilities to fire. The good thing is that we have almost minute-level details, the amount of minutes before impact. We have that based on the radars and the other sensors that we have. So we go to shelters according to the Home Front Command orders and directives, and we go out when they tell us that it's safe. That's also a level of, investment in public safety and security that the state of Israel has done in order to protect its civilians, and I think that is commendable. But at the end of the day, I think we're looking at a few tough days where there will be counterstrikes, and I think that now the Israeli establishment, the Israeli Air Force, Mossad, and others, perhaps additional forces as well, will retaliate against the Iranians, and maybe then the Iranians will continue to retaliate. In terms of the bigger context, I think it's super important that we remain cognizant of the fact that the negotiations, according to the U.S., are still open, and that path exists for the Iranians to choose. If they choose to stop trying to develop nuclear bombs, and if they choose to relinquish enrichment in Iran, then that is an option that exists, but that is the option that exists, nothing else. If they continue to try to obfuscate and delay and continue to enrich uranium to military grade and aspire or rush towards nuclear capabilities, that's not going to happen, and that's an offer, that's something of the past. And I think it's important that the Iranians understand that.
All right, Jonathan Conricus, former spokesman for the IDF, thank you so much.